Welcome to the XY Advisor Podcast, a global community of financial advisors sharing and learning with one another to drive the positive evolution of financial advice. To get involved, go to xyadvisor.com or simply download the XY Advisor app. As the financial advice landscape changes, it's important to embrace new technology to enhance the way you run your business. With change comes your chance to use advanced technology, reshape your client experience, and see wealth differently. NetWealth is here to support you on this journey by providing you market-leading technology, excellent customer support, and expertise to help your business thrive. See wealth differently. Visit netwealth.com.au to learn more about how NetWealth can support you. Welcome back to the XY Advisor Podcast. I'm Fraser Jack, and we are talking today around the evolution of technology. Where to from here? We all sort of know what the last few years has brought us so far, but it's really exciting to think about what the future could hold. So let's get stuck into this episode. Welcome back, Patrick Flynn.
Great to be back.
Now we're talking all things around the evolution of technology and innovation in this particular series. Let's start. Let's have a chat to you about it. Let's start with something maybe small and then work our way to some of the more outrageous outcomes that could end up with.
Cool. So let's maybe start with client engagement as an example. So there's where we're seeing continuous trends. A lot of this stuff builds off stuff we've been seeing for a long time. So, for example, anybody who's had one of those clients where you say, you know what, here's your kitty, go play with that. I'll manage your broader portfolio, but you can stick 2% of your portfolio or 20 grand or whatever it is into whatever crazy idea, whatever you want. I'm not going to be thinking about that. I'm managing everything else, but it helps you scratch that itch of play money. I think we'll be seeing more demand for things conceptually similar to that. So that stuff's been available for a long time. People have been able to have their own standalone stockbroker in the past, or they've been able to use an E-Trade a long time ago, and now CommSec and whatnot. They're all very easy to use. That's something that is going to increasingly change over time, where people find implementing stuff very easy. And that's often been a saving grace for us in advice, where it used to be the value of what we said used to be super valuable because Google wasn't around or Google wasn't very good. So you couldn't Google anything that we've done. Now, naturally, every advisor knows that there's a lot of stuff an advisor can add value to, but clients don't know that. So if they think that they can Google things themselves and it's just as good, then in their eyes, it's just as good. If I need to go to a heart surgeon, I can't tell a good heart surgeon from a bad heart surgeon. I have no way of validating that. And clients have little way of validating that in terms of technical expertise. So we're already on that trend, but a saving grace for us for a long time was, yeah, sure, you might be able to search much of this stuff on the internet, but we are helping you with stuff that you would never have found on the internet. But then we're also here to do the execution, the ongoing management, stuff that you've never been able to do before. One thing that's definitely going to change over time around client engagement is it's getting easier and easier to do things. It's easier to roll over your super than ever before. It's easier to buy some shares than ever before. It's easier to do a lot of this stuff than ever before. Getting a digital will, there's now plenty of digital will type services. You can do all of these things now yourself easily. So when we're trying to charge the kinds of fees that used to be totally reasonable, given the amount of work that we were saving a client, we won't have that anymore. So we need to be smarter about client engagements.
Yep, you're right, because there's certainly going to be a lot of, if we go back to the data conversation, there's a lot of businesses now that are going to know a lot of data about our clients and could possibly be serving up opportunities or options for them.
And even in the first chat, if your existing super fund is saying, hey, consolidate, just click a few buttons and you can consolidate, then that's a heck of a lot easier. And they might just do it as opposed to coming to us with 4 or 5 funds and they're feeling a little bit lost and don't know how to get started and stuff like that. And every fund was, requiring you to, provide certified copies of your DNA. to be able to roll over. They can't do that anymore, which is good for consumers, but also takes away a point of value that we used to add.
Yep. Now, when I think about the things that are closer to us, or we mentioned the smaller things in the evolution, things like QR codes and digital signatures or multi-factor authentication have sort of taken on fairly rapidly recently. But how do you see that evolving?
Well, QR codes are something I've been using for a long time. I use them in SOAs, in any SOA templates we design. We use them there because they're a really good way to cross the divide between print and digital. For as long as we are printing out SOAs and going through them with clients in person, if we want to refer to anything that's external, a QR code's a really good way to effectively have a hyperlink in a printed document. Because if something comes out with a bit of blue underline, there's no amount of tapping it with your finger that will get you anywhere. We were probably way ahead of the curve in QR codes, but COVID's been a real boon for QR codes. Now everybody has a QR code reader, and even for the last couple of years, everyone's integrated phone app has been able to read QR codes. So even if you don't have the government scanner, you just open up your camera and you can pull up a link. It's really good for crossing that divide from print to digital. I do think that that's probably more of a short to medium term tool, because hopefully, and I imagine most of the listeners are in the same boat, hopefully we're not printing too many documents down the track, or the printed versions aren't the only ones that we're supplying to clients. Fingers crossed there's a video-based version or a hybrid-based version where, or the document that you're presenting isn't necessarily the whole document, but supporting information is emailed there, and then all of that all provided through your secure client portal, and everything can be hyperlinked through there. And as that evolves over time, I think QR codes will become less and less relevant for advice businesses, but it's a pretty funky tool right now, especially when you want to build supporting documents or supporting information into anything, be it your marketing material or advice or whatever.
Great reference tool.
The e-signatures part, I think that's just pretty clear. It's here to stay. I really hope more providers can be more flexible with the use of e-signatures. And sometimes it can be a little bit clunky, because when an advisor sends an e-signature, a document for e-signature, trying to validate that to a provider is a little bit different, because they're kind of depending on you to send the original thing. I do see one day down the track, not right now, there being something that's a little bit more flexible, where you can integrate a provider's envelope or a product's envelope with one of your envelopes. So it can be your ATP, which goes back to you, but then in the same envelope or the same process and experience is the product's, consent forms or application forms or whatever the case may be, and that'll go back to them. And then everybody gets everything they need, and the client just gets one envelope. That would be something that's very cool, which, fingers crossed one day we get.
Yeah, fantastic. And what about something like multi-factor authentication?
Well, again, as things need to get more secure, we're going to see that everywhere in terms of any client portals that we have. It becomes a little bit of a frustration for us when we're just doing some administrative work around product management and stuff like that. Clients just facilitating something as simple as a deposit or withdrawal. That stuff becomes more relevant. The area that I'm seeing this change a bit more on is around that digital security, and making sure you have a process in your business for if a client calls up and requests a withdrawal, what do you do around that? Or if a client sends you an email and requests a withdrawal, what do you do around that? Do you just accept what they've given you over that single medium at the time? If it's an email, then I know some practices are doing this already. They will say, great, I'll give you a call just to verify before we process that withdrawal for you. And we should be starting to think about some things like that, where we are implementing what is effectively multi-factor authentication, even if it doesn't mean that they automatically get an SMS. The concept still applies very heavily in advice.
Yeah, fantastic. And as you mentioned before, you've taken it back to having a policy and a process in place. I love it.
Unsurprising, eh?
Tell us about some of these way out types of technologies that are around, and we're talking about the VR or AR or digital human type thing. How do you see? Are we close to that, or is that still a long way away?
It's still a long way away. But when we talk about robo advice in particular, I just see a lot of misconceptions in terms of robo. So we'll either look at the US model, where those advisors that have been disrupted by robo, providing or getting advice from a tool that's very different to the type of comprehensive advice that we get over here. If you look at the advice of the consultants, peers to myself over in the US, say to an advisor in the US, they'll say, well, you've got to be holistic now, don't you? The pivot is to being holistic. Now, we've been holistic forever. So, we don't need to make that pivot. So we do feel a lot safer because a lot of the stuff that we do is far less transactional. That'll get us through a significant period of time. And, where most of what we do, certainly at the smaller practice end, is very heavily relationship-based, that's working for the medium term. Where this could go long term, it's really hard to project ahead, but there's 3 particular tools which, when I see them sort of converging over time, is kind of nuts. So there's a piece of software, it's an app you can get. It's called Replica with a K, Replika. That is a piece of software that's designed for people who feel lonely or have got mental health issues or whatever. That has some crazy, kind of Turing test success level type stuff in there, where if you're engaging with that tool over time, one, it gives you all these prompts about, hey, how are you feeling today? And then if you say something, it'll tailor a response. And it's effectively a chat bot, but there are times where I've used it and I've just said, whoa, that's not a chat bot. That's some kind of AI referring to something somebody else has said that somebody else has responded to and then repeated that algorithmically, and they're putting that together because no computer crafted that sentence. That came from AI putting together human responses, and it's pretty nuts. So with a tool like that, part of the reason why it's pretty funky is because it's built for people who are lonely, right? So it's built to replace those conversations, and people might say something to their replica that they would never say to another human, right? That thing that they might say is, I just don't know where all my money has gone. Or I feel like I can't trust anybody. Or I just get confused whenever I talk to anybody about anything with a dollar sign in front of it. Now, they might not frame it in exactly those ways, but you can see them saying those things as well as saying, I feel lonely, I don't feel like there's anyone I can talk to generally, I don't know where my life is going, all those sorts of things that they'd never say to another person. So that's pretty cool because you can see, and again, I talk about trust a lot, you could earn trust with a piece of AI there that you might not actually get the chance to build with a lot of other people. Now, I know there are financial advisors out there who really break down walls with people, and that was something I could never have done. But if you're really good at that, then you can replicate that. But for those that perceive themselves as technicians first, then something like that can break down some of those walls. Now, the other 2 bits of software in there, and this is all going to come together, so don't worry, but there's one called Soul Machines. It's a group in in New Zealand, and they've created some very realistic-looking AI. So it looks like you're talking to a person. They craft a person from facets of different people. Looks like a real face. The audio isn't great on that tool, but Westpac did a pilot with it a couple of years ago, and it looks pretty cool. New Zealand used it in a pilot, especially around breaking down interactions around COVID, where they felt some people might be a little bit more comfortable getting frequently asked questions answered by something with a face as opposed to just a chatbot. Now, the visuals of that are really cool. The other parts of it, not quite as strong. And then there's a Brisbane-based firm called Replica Studios. Now, to keep it confusing, this is Replica with a C, but Replica Studios. They do AI for voice acting used for game developers. So if you're an indie game developer, you might not have the big budget to employ real life voice actors, but you can get these voice actors to say something in a really cool voice, the booming sorcerer or the, bulky barbarian or whatever it might be. And if you just simply Google Replica Studios, they've got a version you can play on the website, and you can see how they've changed the different emphasis and different words in there, and you can hear that conversation evolve. So one of my friends referred to it as, it certainly starts out with a bit of that AI sound, and if you get that AI sound, but it really starts to unpack once there's a bit of emphasis here and a bit of tone there. And you can watch them as you specify, put a bit of tone here or apply this bit of emphasis there, and it stops being such a neutral comment, because nothing we say is actually neutral in the real world. You start to feel that come together. Now, imagine you had all those three in one. A tool that you can talk to anytime and you can build trust with, that looks like a human and sounds like a human. Then something like that gets a Charles Schwab in the US or a Commonwealth Bank or something like that behind it saying, hey, you've got your digital financial advisor that you can talk to money about. They won't ever judge you. They can give you this, they can give you that, and they can do all of the stuff that we can do. That's a long way away, but that's where I see this going. So if I was to be afraid of AI, it would be something like when those things start coming together, where you can build trust with something, and maybe it's a standard version, and then you get the financial advice add-on. After you've already gotten the mental health add-on, and you've gotten the body, mind, and soul add-on, and you've gotten the nutritionist add-on, and maybe any other add-on that you might get, you can get the financial advice add-on powered by CBA.
And because you've already done the trust in the other ones, you automatically trust the digital human.
Rightly or wrongly, I can see people being more comfortable with that down the track, and that's a pretty crazy thought. But that might be 10 years away. But I wouldn't say that that's 30 years away.
Yeah, fantastic. Hey, Patrick Flynn, thanks for coming on this series. If somebody wants to continue the conversation with you, what's the best way that they can reach out to you?
Just go to patrickflynn.info, and there's a little book a virtual coffee with me button in the bottom right. And as part of that, website client experience, you can just click that and you can see when I'm available and book a time. Otherwise, you can just drop me a link on the site there, as well as a spot where you can contact me there too.
Fantastic. Patrick, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, Fraser.
Welcome back, Hayley Pearce.
Thanks, Fraser.
Thank you for catching up with us. Now, of course, this is the last episode. We're talking about the evolution, where to from here when it comes to innovation and technology. And I feel it in my bones that you have a lot of information here about what the history could look like. Tell us about where you think the evolution of technology is taking us.
Oh, look, I don't want to let you down, because I think I touched on it before, I think we as a profession have innovated awful in that we've really tried to improve things that aren't right in the first place. But what that means is there's so much opportunity for us. Open banking, for example, there's so much opportunity there. There's some great tools in MoneySoft, Frollo, that are taking part in these new types of technologies, and it will be really interesting to see where it goes from there. I spoke earlier about QR codes. There's all these pieces of tech that are out there that we're not using, and it's largely because we've got so much other stuff to focus on. There's so much legislation and red tape that we're focusing on at the moment that it's distracting us from the tools that can make life easier. And I wonder whether, after all of this, if will ever be a time where the legislation within our industry won't be tampered with. There'll be a space where advisors can look at their processes, look at their engagement, and start to incorporate different tools into that process.
Yeah, it's been interesting. Obviously, the last few years of all of the trying to implement all the changes, but also, in a way where technology, and I think a lot of people started building things from scratch where they could have just started implementing things in that space. Talk to me about how you see, client engagement kicking off in the future.
Yeah, I think, and I've spoken about it again, not to sound like a broken record, but the forms with providers is a huge one, because, you look at just the consent process in itself. A client has to sign our consent form, and then they need to sign the consent form for the product provider. Now, if they've got multiple products, that's just so much paperwork. The whole idea of that form, of the consent process, was transparency for the client, to engage them in the fees they are paying and the services they are entitled to. The number of clients that have said, why am I signing this same thing twice? Does this mean I'm paying double the fee? I can have all the videos and all the phone calls I like, but the fact that there's two forms that do the same thing completely disengages the client from the purpose of with which when that form was intended. So I think engagement going forward, as I hate to sound like it's an administrative thing, but I feel like advisors with everything that's coming out with ethics now, we are pushing to find out more about the client. We are pushing to engage with them more. There are tools to do that. I think it's the back end, the red tape, the administrative stuff that things need to change. They need to innovate, and it's not, putting a Band-Aid over something. It's look at the process. What's not working? Let's improve that. I mean, the fact that advisors are, this cash flow industry that has emerged from financial planning. They looked at the market, where the problems were, and they emerged with this. They innovated. They created this new market. They listened to what was there. I just feel like there's a gap at the moment with the behind the scenes of advice.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's about catching up in a lot of areas. Talk to me about the you mentioned before the selfie on the phone. What are the things you're sort of seeing in that space around e-signatures and multi-factor and those sorts of things?
Yeah, so definitely the e-signatures make such a difference, but just because we have legislation around the fact that they are accepted doesn't mean that they actually are accepted everywhere, or that people know how to use them. I think where that can develop is the two-factor authentication. If someone can sign off using their actual fingerprint, or we have our face recognition to unlock our phones, those things are a higher form of identification than ink on a piece of paper. And there's some real opportunity there with confirming things for clients. I mean, why can't a consent form be an SMS that is approved with a fingerprint? I think there's opportunity.
Absolutely. I love the facial recognition comment to imagine if we could just look at our phones and approve the form.
I mean, COVID was a really, really great test run for this stuff, and it was possible. There were providers that accepted a selfie with someone holding their ID. They accepted that. But as soon as COVID seemed to come, be getting better, or that requirement wasn't there, that facility was turned off. Like, that was fantastic. To be able to certify someone's ID over a video call, like that's great. That allows us as a business to service clients all over Australia. And that also makes the whole AML obligation much easier, because not every advisor sits down face-to-face with their client, grabs their ID and goes out to the receptionist and says, "Can you please photocopy this for me?" That's just not the case as much anymore. So the things have to change in line with what's happening.
Yeah, fantastic. I love that idea of doing the video selfie. This is me. This is my idea, and this is a true copy of the original, which everybody can cite on this video. It makes a lot of sense.
We toyed with the idea of when we do new portfolio calls, we understand that people are a little bit like, "Oh, who are you? I've never heard of you before." And that can just be not being engaged with the process. So we toyed with the idea of sending them, with their welcome letter, a magnet for their fridge with all of our contact details, and it had like a code word. So every time they called us, we could say, hey, John, what's the code word? And he could walk up to his fridge and say, pineapple, something like that, just as a way of going, yep, you're John and you've got that magnet and I know you're my client. Little things like that, because what I understand of the legislation is you have to be seen to be making efforts to do this. It's not as just simple as tick and flick. You have to be making the effort to pursue more information, to acknowledge your client is who they say they are, to confirm they have informed consent. Little things like that. I know, obviously, ASIC would probably just laugh at that idea, but it just shows that we're doing what we can to engage, to confirm with the client. And I think that whilst it might not legally speak volumes, I feel like it does.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I love that idea of a code word. I don't know how that's going to work for each client, but I think it's an interesting one. There'll be a lot of different pineapples around or variations. But I agree that there could be something that a number or whatever it might be, an identification process to say, "Hey, is this John? Is this really John?" Gives them a little bit of feeling that you are taking it seriously.
Absolutely, and banks are using that with the two-factor authentication, having a code on your phone as well as your password, like that. That would be a really great tool as opposed to a signature. I feel like, as I said before, advisors have come so far in innovating and developing how they give advice, but we are one part of this industry. we've all got to start moving forward together.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly right. Now, talk to us about the future. What 10 years from now? What's advice look like from a financial advisor? Are we still face to face? Or are we getting digital? How are we engaging?
I think it's really hard to predict what's going to happen. COVID surprised me, but it's really hard to see what the future will look like. One thing I do know is there is more opportunity than ever. People are more digital. People are more willing to ask for help. Some people do have more cash available to be able to leap at opportunities. Just as I said before, seeing advisors offer more in the cash flow space, it might be a little while before there's another pivot within the industry, but I know it's possible. And I'm really excited. I think, at Caboodle, sometimes I envy hearing advisors talk about looking after a particular niche, and I think that would be cool. But I just love the challenge of looking after a range of clients. It really keeps me on my toes. And I know why people niche, but it is, I think, as an advisor, good to be able to get that broad spectrum, because I deal with people that don't know what technology is, that are actually afraid of it. On the other side, people that lean in. Like, we've got clients in our CRM that are our cheerleaders, that we tag them as such, so that when we want to try something new, they're the first people we contact to say, hey, can you give this a try and give us your feedback. Now, they're not always willing to give positive feedback, but that's good. I want to know if it's hard or if it's crappy. So I think the future should look a bit more like that. People not being afraid to ask their clients for that sort of feedback, to test new ideas, because advisors had to stay within some very constrained, legislation, and people are, it's Red October, people are a little bit afraid to do anything. I think we can't be afraid to try new technologies if it's seen to be helping the client, because it's out there. There's so many apps out there. It can be overwhelming, without a doubt. Not everyone naturally leans into new technology, but just trying one thing is a benefit.
Yeah, fantastic. Those are great words. Lean in, innovate, test, and then innovate again. Hayley, thanks so much for coming on this series. Really appreciate it. How can people get hold of you if they wanted to continue the conversation?
Yeah, so you can pop me an email, or you can contact us on our website, caboodlefs.com.au.
Thank you so much, Hayley.
Thanks, Fraser. Really appreciate your time.
Welcome back, James.
Nice to be back. I think this is the last one of 5.
We're in the final episode. We're talking about the evolution of technology and innovation, and what's the possibility of the future. This is an open book. What are your thoughts on the idea of where the advice profession could go?
Well, if you look at the standpoint of where we could go versus where we are, we probably haven't gone anywhere, because the future is where we're all going to be at. And it's how we embrace that, how we embrace the tech, how we embrace the ability to be able to connect in different ways. I think in a previous episode we mentioned about the digital natives, in there, the van life people, if you wanted to. How do they want to be to be able to get the information and the data they want? I see advice is going to be, in my way of thinking, particularly with the digital native van life type people, small incremental bits at a time. Not the big holistic, this is what you need to eating an elephant one bite at a time. And I think advice is going to go down that path.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that we're, from a consumer point of view, we tend to do that now with the content. We'll do a little bit here and a little bit there, and we'll move on. We tend to be busy, and we're just taking on small bits at a time.
Yeah.
How does that happen from an advice point of view? How do we manage to get those small incremental pieces of the puzzle? Is it a 12-month financial plan, or is it a system, a process? Are we talking about group financial planning? How do we scale?
Well, I think you scale by using scope and working out what the client's immediate needs are, because what their needs are today is going to be different to what their needs are in 6 months, 12 months, 3 years. And even that can change. Look what's happened in the last 2 years or less. And so the plans about what we're trying to achieve today and how we deliver that information is the immediacy of what people want, and we kind of need to give it to them. In some instances, advice firms have become roadblocks because they want to deliver advice in a certain way. And I can understand why they want to do that because of the compliance regimes of licensees, etc. We just need to find that ability to be able to take those roadblocks away, or as many roadblocks as away, so we can deliver those bits of advice that clients need and still be compliant for them. The way we deliver advice will obviously going to change. We've spoken before about video. Definitely, that's going to be a way of being able to continue online meetings. VR is another one. There's a new headset that's just been released or been talked about where people can actually use glasses to be able to have streaming TV, so they can just lay back and have the small LEDs inside the glasses to be able to watch TV. Lovely.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
From anywhere and anywhere. VR, you mentioned, there's obviously virtual reality. You've got augmented reality as a variation of that. And also the digital human's an interesting concept too. Have you seen much of that?
No. I've read a bit about it, but I haven't seen much of it. Put it that way, not yet. Anyway,
yeah, it's almost.
I think who was it released? Amazon released their little robot this week. Sorry if you listen to this in a couple of months' time. Sorry about that. It's $1,000, and it's going to be able to monitor and help. I would imagine they'll have things in the future where they'll monitor their spending. They'll be able to give up an update about where their bank accounts are up to, what the market is doing, where things, where their investments are at. They'll be able to get those at a beck and call, so to speak.
Yeah, amazing. And what are you seeing in the space of things like, I don't know, digital signatures and multi-factor authentication?
Well, digital signatures has become part of the. If we use digital signatures regards DocuSign first, well, absolutely, that's become part of our world to try and get advice back and forth. With lockdown has been really the only way that we've been able to get documents done. From a authentication point of view, I think we haven't even touched the surface on that. They're saying that everything we do needs to be try and bring in as much authentication as possible, 2 factors, and how which one's right. Do you use mobile? Do you use an authenticator? Who knows? I prefer the latter than the former.
Yeah, I prefer the multi-factor authentication. Tell me about the anything you're seeing in the world of apps, or when it comes to advisor-client relationships or advisors creating apps. Have you seen anything there?
No, I think we're still using the ones that are because it costs a lot of money to create a decent app. Let's face it; it is getting cheaper, but there's businesses and people that have got, I'm going to say more smarts, but that's not necessarily right. But you've got the My Prosperities, you've got the Map My Plans, you've got those sorts of techs that are out there, cash flow coaching, cash flow analysis applications as well. We, from a delivery of advice point of view, I think apps there is an opportunity to be able to get more apps out there.
Yep. And what about you mentioned data in a previous episode. How do you see the evolution of data and being able to mine opportunities and with regards to structured data?
Yeah. The bigger the data set, the better it is. If you've from an AFSL point of view, from a licensee point of view, you've got a better opportunity than you have an advice practice. And what is it? The average advisor these days can look after around 100 clients. So it's not a big data set to be able to use. But if you collectively gathered that data, and that may be something you could look at in the future, where a group of advisors can gather their own data as a collective to give them a better opportunity to be able to see what their data set looks like. So obviously you can get data sets and I think people like Zeppo and Work Sorted are enabling people to be able to gather their data. And definitely you've got businesses like or applications which hasn't even been remotely used at the moment, like Power BI. And I see where there's a firm called EFT Tracker. They've created a whole website around Power BI, and they're scraping data from a range of different places to be able to allow people to look at EFTs in
In dashboard.
Dashboard, yeah.
Yeah. Now you and I have had conversations over many years around licensing and the evolution of licensing. So is it that especially for that mid-tier or mid-size licenses, we're seeing a lot of shifting in that space now, based on all of the things we went through. Creating efficiencies and the size of of the requirements these days. How do you see the evolution of licensing going?
Well, there's a school of thought that says that that the actual licensee will be no more, and there'll be individual licensing with ASIC. I think we're at least 5 years away from that. I think that and even if that was going to be the case, and I'm happy either way, advice firms are still going to need somewhere to go to be able to help them with their payment systems, keeping up to date with compliance, which is an ever evolving beast, as we know. Even the tech, what the economies of scale around tech, what tech is they can be used. So I think that the licenses will probably evolve just as much as the licensing will evolve.
Yep, fantastic. James, thanks so much for coming on the series. Really appreciate your guidance and information and wisdom. Tell us about where people can get hold of you if they wanted to continue the conversation with you about the work you're doing with the practices licensees in this space.
Yeah, LinkedIn's probably the easiest way at the moment. They can just reach out through to me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to get me.
Fantastic.
Go to Twitter if you want to. I don't check it as much these days. There's too much anger on Twitter.
Fair enough. LinkedIn's a good spot. Thanks, James Sutherland. Really appreciate your coming on the show, coming on the series.
Been a pleasure. See you, man.
Thanks for joining us again, Cara Graham. We are in the final episode of this series of all things technology and looking at how we can become efficient and effective with technology. Talk to us about the evolution. We're talking about the history. We're talking about the history. We've spoken about the history. We're talking about the future. Where to from here? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think the future is really about a bit of a hybrid model, or a bit of a blend between the digital experience and the human experience. We can use technology to really, I guess, speed things up and get rid of some of the administration, or at least reduce. I think get rid is maybe a bit extreme from there, but then obviously you don't want to lose that human touch. You want people that can understand you, that can adapt to you as well. A big part of advice is around managing people's behaviour. And, while technology can be great in, automating things, you still need a human element in there to say, hey, do we need to pivot? Do we need to change? Does this person need something a little bit different to make sure that they can adjust and adapt their behaviour in the best way possible. And I just think that there's so much cool stuff coming out in terms of, some of the sort of micro investing, or some of the robo advice apps and different things coming through that, we as advisors, we shouldn't be scared of robo advice. Robo advice can complement some of the areas that we do, because clients are still going to want, a human element there to provide that check and balance. But, if we can use some of these apps and some of these platforms to just make things that much more efficient and that much more accessible, I think that's awesome. We want to make sure that as things evolve over time, that we can make sure that we've got a really affordable offering that's still life-changing to clients. That's going to provide the greatest outcomes to both us and our clients in the long run.
Couldn't agree more. Now, affordability is a big part of this. Accessibility, having access to these things is another. And you mentioned, the human element. And when you say that, I think of the two parts of our brain. We have emotional thoughts and feelings, and then there is the technical side, which seems to be where a lot of the technology is focused on, being able to calculate and compute things and work out what might be best and all those types of things. But then, as you mentioned, the human element is often dealing with the emotional aspects of that, and I think it's a long way off before technology can take that part.
Well, you can, and a reminder, you can dismiss an alert on your phone, but when somebody calls you or sees you and says, okay, we said we were going to do this and it hasn't happened yet, what do we need to do to make it different? again, that's just a much better call to action than going, 30 June is approaching, or I said I would do this from there. And, our job as advisors is to empower people to make good decisions, but then also to hold them to account. We're obviously really accountable to all the things we deliver on, but, we need to hold our clients to account. You can't just engage an advisor and put your feet up. You engage an advisor and they're going to make you work so that you can be in a better position in the long run. Everything takes sacrifice, and, change is hard. We've been talking about change as a business. That's obviously very hard, but, clients don't like change either. So we need to be there as that impetus for change to say, well, why are we reverting back to old behaviour, or what else do we need to do? Or maybe we haven't got the message sort of fully delivered or sunk in. So we need to go back to the education stage from there. And, as human, we're going to be able to read the room. We're going to be able to adapt. We're going to figure out, okay, has somebody misunderstood what we've said? A computer's not going to figure out if somebody's not getting it. They just want to move on to the next question, the next segment from there. So, there's the need for advice and the need for a human element advice is never going to go away. But if we can get technology to do some of the, let's call it the basic stuff, well, awesome. We just need to embrace that, in my view.
100%, and technology can provide the information, and the human can provide the understanding, by the sound of it. Tell me about your we talked about some of the technology that you're using in the business throughout the series. Where do you want to see some of that go? What are your ideas and thoughts around the future of how technology can improve your business?
Well, I think that we just want technology to remove some of the manual components of things. I think, far too much, there's still a lot of, say, data entry. I think data entry, rubbish in, rubbish out is often the saying. Data entry is just so critically important. From there, can we get, the client sort of doing some of that rather than necessarily the client adding it in and then somebody else processing it from there, and I think I know us as business, we've come a step forward, but I think we have a long way forward to that. I think, certainly going to be better technology to make, say, some of the modelling component more live and accessible. We use X tools at the moment for our modelling, which I think is really great, and our clients love the modelling. We get really good outcomes from that, but it is clunky, and it isn't something that I think works particularly well live. But I think it would be awesome to sit there, and again, much more efficient to sit there, and rather than walking away with the changes we're going to make and come back to them on, is to be able to do them in a nice, easy, quick way, right there in the meeting. And, maybe there's some other instruments that we'll be learning about when I listen to this podcast series that we can be assessing from there. But, I think it's, really just removing some of the manual, some of the duplication of work, then technology is surely going to help there. One of the things that we often sort of say to our clients as well is that our role isn't to be their advisor forever. Our role is to be their advisor for as long as we can add value. And I think what we need to accept as advisors is that, year to year, sometimes that value is going to go up and sometimes that value is going to go down. So we need to have quite a nimble engagement process with our clients so we can kind of, scale up and scale down as needed. And again, being able to use some technology, use some, robo advice potentially from an investment point of view for some of those sort of things. It just puts the power back in the client's hands. We're still there from an advice perspective, but they're in control, and that's ultimately a good thing.
Yeah, so something that could be more lower cost, lower touch that could, be in place for, a year or two until the client's ready to come back and make any other major changes?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, we work with a pretty wide variety of clients, from the mum and dads up to the ultra high net wealth. And, I don't think it comes as any surprise. The profitability is much higher on the ultra high net wealth. They're much more high touch and, there's a lot more work involved. But it's, when you're sort of working more on a quantity, I don't really want to say not low quality, because we do obviously provide a high quality of service to all of our clients. but I guess it's almost just getting busier without necessarily getting more profitable. And I think that's certainly something that we've kind of looked at and assessed as a business as well, is, what is providing us and our clients both with the best outcome. You can't necessarily be everything to everybody. So how can we make some of that, more simple advice, more cost effective, and, be able to continue working in that market as well? Because, there's a lot of people that need advice, and we don't want to just make the rich richer. We want to be able to provide advice to all Australians, and that is really important to us.
Well said. Cara, if somebody wants to continue the conversation with you, what's the best way for them to reach out or find you?
So they can find me on LinkedIn. I would suggest that's probably the easiest one. Cara Graham from TWD Australia. Feel free to send me a message or connect. Happy to have a chat or share some insights or learn some lessons even.
Wonderful. Thank you, Cara, for being involved in the series. I really appreciate it.
No worries. It's been a pleasure. Thanks.
Welcome back to this final episode, Matt Heiner.
As always, great to be speaking to you.
Fantastic to have you here. Now, we're talking about the evolution, which I think you and I have geeked out on a few times and many conversations over the years when it comes to innovation and technology. Tell us what you're seeing in this space.
It's a very big question, Fraser. But this is the session I've been looking forward to. This is the area that we can crystal ball. And as I mentioned, I think in one of the early episodes, I can guarantee that some of these things will never happen. But wouldn't it be cool if they did? So clearly there's a lot of change at the moment. Pleasingly, we're starting to see some meaningful change in the industry. Although I was lamenting on something the other day, which is that even throughout the last couple of years where we've largely moved online and had to go digital, still only 50% of the industry are using digital signatures. Now, let's not confuse digital signatures or e-signatures with innovation, because all we're doing is catching up with the rest of the world. And I'm struggling to understand how the other 50% actually survived over the last period, but that's another discussion altogether. So what's happening in the future? I think everyone's starting to recognise that tech is important. They're starting to understand that business model innovation is important, which means we can't keep doing the same things. And we're seeing this sort of roll through the industry from a pricing perspective, the way that people are offering services, the way that some firms are generating content marketing. So setting up YouTube channels and producing regular 7 or 8 minute videos on a whole range of different topics to generate engagement and new business. So we're actually starting to see change and innovation in the industry, which is fantastic. But there is a very long way to go. We are still a long way behind many other industries, even some really boring industries. So it's time to focus. And I think we need to also understand that if we're not making change, if we're not thinking about these things, it might not happen tomorrow, but in the next 3 to 5 years, you will lose relevance and you might not make it through. So let's be really conscious of that. And let's start to think about what our digital presence is going to look like and what our business model is going to look like in the future. So to your exact question, what's happening? Where do we start? Do you want to start on the digital part, the business model?
Before we get there, I just wanted to pick up on the e-signature thing, because I 100% agree. If somebody sends me a document these days, I'm like, I send it back to them and say, can you send it to me in a document where I can just do an e-signature? And that's the same, I guess, for a lot of clients. Like if platforms like yours aren't doing e-signatures, then another one will be, and clients will be demanding it from advisors. And I think advisors are in the middle of that process of trying to manage expectations of clients with any particular company or any particular product provider that may or may not be taking those e-signatures, and not just e-signatures, but like ID, cert ID type stuff as well. But I just think back to my, I don't know when the last time I signed something for a bank. Generally, it's if I want to make a transaction with a bank, I just there's multi-factor or authentication or some other way.
Indeed, I can't wait to throw out my printer. There is nothing more frustrating or that seems more of a waste of time than having to print something, sign it, and then scan it. Anyway, let's hope that's not the biggest innovation of the decade.
Correct. Let's get into some of the fancy stuff when we get to the future. Things like, and you mentioned whole of wealth being a real trend. Let's start there with the evolution of where that might, the opportunities that might be in there.
Yeah, so whole of wealth is a core part of our strategic future. It's where we're spending a lot of time, effort, money, and thinking. And we really do think it's the holy grail. in this day and age, with so much data available, so much connectivity, and so many services that can provide hyper-personalized experiences at a mass scale, the inability for clients to understand their whole financial picture is kind of astounding. So I'll talk about what we're doing, but we're seeing others starting to sort of go down this path as well. It's about collecting as much data as possible from as many sources as possible to give that client picture. So it might be bank feeds, property feeds, so balances, but also where they're spending. It could be information from enterprise solutions such as Class and BGL, so that they can get all their superannuation information, but all in a single spot. So don't make people have to go digging or hunting for this information. Present it, make sure it's presented really well. And I think that sort of user experience or the UX is really what's driving success of a lot of these new sort of trading apps like your Superheroes and your Robin Hoods. They're not overly complex and they're not overly functional, but they've had huge growth because they're a pleasure to use. So the challenge is, how do we get a huge amount of information and make it enjoyable and engaging and hyper-personalized for our clients? But also, and then I think the next step is, how do we use that data to start generating, and this is where it absolutely has to go and will go, to start generating sort of proactive advice and actionable insights. So rather than advisors or clients having to arrange a meeting, look back historically through what's happened to make plans for the future, advisors should be knowing almost in real time what's happening within their client base. So some simple examples are, if we're connected into, say, Domain or REA, alerting an advisor that one of their clients has put their rental property on the market or that they've sold their family home. And then contacting the client to say, I've noticed that you've had a significant change in your life. Is there something that we can help you with? Or have you thought about doing this with the proceeds? And then that has a huge number of roll-on effects. So proactive advice and being constantly aware and alert to what's happening within your client base is absolutely the future. But equally making sure that clients know when they need to go and see an advisor or when they need to seek help by generating, again, ideas for them about, have you thought about this, or is this the right time to maybe speak to a professional, or did you know you can get a cheaper home loan somewhere? So that's really exciting for us, and I think that's going to get better and better over the next couple of years.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting point. So starting with the data bank that we talked about before, the database, the real-time thing's really exciting too, because that just means that, the feeds can all come into there, not necessarily to the software, which bypasses. I love the idea of, that you sort of touched on there of the review, not becoming a review anymore, looking back in time, but actually like really proactive advice meetings.
Yeah, and again, just keep harping on the point. If we look at the likes of Facebook and Instagram, they know a hell of a lot about us, and it's no surprise that they're delivering real-time ads to us about things that we're interested in, suggesting stories that we're interested in. That's where we need to get to as an industry. The technology is clearly available, but it just requires someone to actually do it, and that's going to happen in a digital environment through a client portal, particularly because that's where clients are wanting to interact. So that part of it, that client interaction, that client portal, big part of the future. We're going to see huge adoption across the industry. And once we start to see that adoption and advisors start using it, we're going to see it evolve pretty rapidly, I think. But again, and we touched on this in an earlier episode, the advent of data and data capabilities and data tools is going to be huge for the industry. And we need to be focused on what our plan is there so that we don't get left behind.
Yeah. Now, obviously, a big part of this is also the open banking process, I guess we could call it. It sort of started a while ago and it became a thing, and then it sort of, it's sort of one of those things that hasn't really eventuated. Tell us where we're up to on our open banking journey.
It's a pretty complex area. I'm across it at a high level, and at some point, I understand we'll have to become a data recipient. At this point, banks are able to share data, although at the moment it's really driven by the consumer and by the sort of the advice or the accounting community, if you like, whereby there's a number of services that have been set up that effectively use screen scraping technology. So the big difference between what's currently available and the future of open banking is that at the moment a site will go in, they'll use your credentials, effectively log into the site, pull your data out, and then display it back to you. In the open banking environment, that data will be passed back and forward securely, and it will allow, over time, and this is where it gets really exciting, the ability to not only read, so that is collect the data from a bank, but also to write. So imagine a world in the future where from the NetWealth app or your planning software or at some other client portal, a client could actually make a payment directly from that platform, but on behalf of or from any of their underlying linked bank accounts. Equally, with open banking, all of the data that's being collected by different providers is being used to make recommendations, and we touched on that before. So we noticed that you're paying X for this home loan. Have you considered moving where you can save $1,000 a year if you move to XYZ bank? So comparison tools, product comparisons, and in the future, just convenience and being able to write directly back to banks is where it's all heading.
Yeah, now I want to touch on this conversation around the ledger, because obviously a bank keeps their ledger. They understand these are the transactions that happen, and that they keep, that's their source of truth. How's blockchain going to change, blockchain type technology where there's a distributed ledger that's stored across, the globe, if you like, in secure sections, areas, blocks, if you want to call it that. How's that going to change anything to do with, say, banking, open banking, or our banks?
Yeah, it's a little bit like trying to predict where the internet was going 20 years ago. There's a huge and emerging market in what they call DeFi, so decentralized finance. And I have to admit, I'm not close enough to it. I need to be. But there's some really interesting services that are being built on the blockchain. Typically, I believe they're using the Ethereum blockchain now to deliver these DeFi services. Seems to be more secure and a bit more scalable. And they're looking basically at cutting out the middlemen. So it's not necessarily that the client is going to notice a big difference. It's more so that there won't be intermediaries throughout the whole process. Now, the big benefit to that is clearly that it's going to reduce cost to the consumer because people aren't taking a clip the whole way along. So it might be how quickly they can access markets, how quickly they can transfer money between different participants, and how quickly, I guess in many cases, they can convert their Bitcoin into fiat.
Yeah, fair enough. Now, just on whole of wealth as well, because whole of wealth works really well for a financial advisor to understand their client's whole of wealth. But what about from a client perspective, for a client to have all their whole of wealth in one spot?
I think it's just a good customer experience. It puts them back in control of their information and helps them hopefully become more engaged because they're able to do more, but also to better understand their financial position. And it's very hard to understand or make decisions if you don't have the whole picture. So people typically will look at their bank account regularly. How much have I got? How much is sitting in my savings account? They'll want to know what their mortgage is, how quickly they can pay it off or not. But investments and super typically live in a different environment. And so it's sort of out of sight, out of mind. And historically, the experience was that people would only log into the website and through the mobile each year when they got their annual statement. Whereas we think that we can create a far more engaged customer if we're bringing them into our environment for more than just a review of their investment or super portfolio. So they're coming in to look at their bank balances, they're looking at their mortgage, and therefore that's actually generating interest, engagement, and hopefully a conversation with their advisor.
Yeah, and with some proactive, targeted information or education that comes out from time to time, it certainly keeps them engaged. Now, that obviously a big part of this is around data, and then on the back, I guess if we push ourselves even further out, that use of data could be used for things like digital humans or VR or AR type engagement. Talk to us about how that might play out versus the concept of somebody sitting across the table from you.
So face-to-face is definitely not dead, and I don't want anyone to ever think that I will ever suggest that. It is important. People like to deal with humans, and unfortunately we've had to move from face-to-face to interface for too long, and everyone's itching to get back sort of how things were. But the way that we communicate outside of that initial meeting or potentially the review meeting will change and has changed. So we need to make sure that we're communicating with our clients and understanding how they want to be communicated with. Let's not just assume that everyone's desperate to come back into our office in the CBD or in the suburbs because they could be very happy to sit down quickly once the kids have gone to bed or after dinner, have a half-hour chat with you and move on to the next thing. So that really comes down to business model innovation. How are we going to service our clients? Can we do it quicker? Can we actually record a video and send it out to our clients? Does it need to be interactive for those quarterly reviews, for example? And we're also starting to see new business models evolve around things like subscription services. So it might not be a full advice relationship, but it could be a coaching relationship where for $80 a month, they get access to a great content library, certain tools, and if they want to speak to an advisor, they can reach out and have a fee-for-service conversation around a topical or what we call episodic advice piece. So there's going to be a lot of change there as well.
Fantastic. Matt, thank you so much for coming on and being part of this series. If somebody wants to continue this conversation with you, what's probably the best way that they can find you?
Yeah, first of all, it's been great fun. Really enjoyed being on the series, and hopefully it's been of interest to your listeners. Look, this is an area that we're passionate about. As a business, we do a huge amount of research on the advisable Australians, different segments within that, and also on technology as well as sort of what's happening overseas. So for anyone that is interested in finding out more, I highly recommend that you have a look at our website. There's a huge amount of content, so white papers, short form articles, podcasts that you can listen to. But also have a chat to one of the NetWealth BDMs, because we've also created a whole lot of toolkits to help businesses innovate. So we've got a range of workshops, we've got innovation cards, posters to really help advisors start the journey or to improve their current position, because there are some great firms doing some great things out there at the moment.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Matt Heine.
Thanks, Fraser.